Hello everyone and welcome to the Reporting the PRO Results Clearly session on the CONSORT-PRO extension from the Proteus Consortium. My name is Mel Calvert and I'm Professor of Outcomes Methodology at the University of Birmingham in the UK. And I'm delighted to co-present this session with my colleague, Professor Michael Brundage. Over to you, Michael.
Hi folks, I'm Mike Brundage. I'm a radiation oncologist and professor in oncology at Queen's University Cancer Research Institute in Kingston, Ontario, Canada. Thank you for your interest in the Proteus Consortium. This consortium aims to optimize the use of patient-reported outcomes to ensure that the patient's perspective is effectively captured and can be used to inform research and practice. In this presentation, we focus on guidance for optimal reporting of PRO findings from clinical trials. Proteus was initially funded by the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute and has continuing funding from Genentech. Proteus stands for Patient-Reported Outcome Tools, Engaging Users and Stakeholders. The materials that we'll present today, as well as other resources of the consortium, can be found on the Proteus website shown at the bottom of this slide, theproteusconsortium.org. This presentation is one in a series about Proteus and the tools and resources available to optimize the use of patient-reported outcomes in clinical trials. Proteus Consortium aims to achieve this optimization by promoting best practices across the continuum of the clinical trial lifecycle, as shown here, including optimization of the trial protocol with respect to its PROs, selecting the appropriate PRO measure or measures, conducting statistical analysis that are appropriate for the trial PRO-specific objectives, reporting the trial results appropriately, and communicating these results for use in clinical practice. In this presentation, as highlighted here in yellow, we provide an overview of consensus-derived standards for optimal reporting of PRO data in clinical trials. In other presentations, we provide a broad overview of all of the Proteus tools, and we also provide a set of advanced presentations for applying each of the tools individually. Although the focus of this presentation is on standards for PRO reporting, guidance for displaying the PRO data is also a component of best reporting practices and is summarized in a companion presentation. We developed the CONSORT-PRO guidance in order to promote clearly described PRO findings in clinical trial publications. As such, the CONSORT-PRO guidance is used along with the main CONSORT recommendations for clinical trial reporting in general. The CONSORT-PRO extensions and elaborations identify the relevant information to include in clinical trial publications that include PROs. The CONSORT-PRO extension was published in JAMA in 2013. And on this slide, we gratefully acknowledge the other members of the project team, as well as our collaborators and our funders. Over to you, Dr. Calvert.
Thank you. So why do we actually need PRO reporting guidance? Well, I think the first thing to say is that clinicians, patients, and policymakers really value patient-reported outcome information. This provides a patient voice in clinical trials research, and we really need to ensure that these data are reported clearly to make sure that we can maximize the value of these data. Existing reporting guidelines are sadly not adhered to, and we know from our work that actually many trial reports simply do not include PRO data or are suboptimally reported. And the challenge with this is that poor reporting hampers the use of PRO data in clinical practice and undermines the clinician's ability to use PRO data in their practice to benefit patients. Patients really value these data in making informed choices about what treatments are right for them. So we really do need to make sure that these data are reported appropriately. And improved reporting of PRO data should facilitate robust interpretation of the results from RCTs and help inform patient care. The objective of the CONSORT-PRO resource builds on the work of the CONSORT statement. This is existing reporting guidelines that you're probably all familiar with, which aim to improve the reporting of randomized controlled trials more generally. The consort statement has provided for many years a brilliant tool to help us report trials in a standardised way and make sure that the methods are rigorous so that people can appropriately critical appraise trial findings. However, crucially, the existing consort statement did not include guidance on the reporting of PROs. So our work back in 2013 helped provide an evidence-based extension of the consort statement for reporting of patient-reported outcomes in clinical trials. And these are called extensions. And we also provided elaborations on the existing Consort 2010 statement, specifically as applied to PROs, which we've called elaborations. The methods for the resource development are outlined below. We undertook a rigorous process in order to develop the guidance, involving many international stakeholders from a range of disciplines. These included regulators, patient partners, academics, trialists, and clinical societies and policymakers. Firstly, we commenced with a systematic review of existing reporting guidance and a survey of international stakeholders. We then developed the draft guidance, which was reviewed by the International Society of Quality of Life Research, Best Practice for PROs in Trials Task Force. And this was debated at the International Society of Quality of Life conference in 2011. We then held a 2-day international consensus meeting involving 29 participants in 2012, which again involved a range of different stakeholder views. And from this meeting, we generated the final CONSORT-PRO guidance, which I'll go on to describe to you in a moment. The CONSORT-PRO reporting guidance is aimed to be used in conjunction with the existing CONSORT 2010 statement and related extensions appropriate for the trial design. The guidance includes 5 additional checklist items, extensions to the existing CONSORT 2010 statement, recommended to be reported in all RCTs where PROs are a primary or important secondary outcome. In addition, it provides additional elaborations on the existing CONSORT 2010 checklist items as applied to the reporting of PROs in RCTs. Here is an overview of the PRO extensions. I'm going to go through each of those in more detail in a moment, but essentially we have a number of extensions which you can see on the left-hand side appear in different sections of the trial report. So we would recommend that as you write your manuscript for publication in a peer-reviewed journal, that you use the CONSORT-PRO statement, the original 2010 statement, and the CONSORT-PRO extension to help work through what you should include around PROs in each section of your manuscript to make sure that you can report the PRO data in a robust way that can meaningfully inform patient care. I will go through each of these now in turn. So the first extension is an item for inclusion in the abstract. This relates to item 1B of the CONSORT 2010 statement. The CONSORT 2010 statement said that we need to provide a structured summary of trial design, methods, results, and conclusions. The extension for PROs states that the PRO should be identified in the abstract as either a primary or a secondary outcome. This is really crucial because when people are undertaking systematic reviews, or when clinicians or patients themselves are looking for evidence in peer-reviewed publications, then you need to be able to identify which clinical trials have assessed patient symptoms or quality of life. Therefore, inclusion of this in the abstract will help facilitate indexing and identification of studies to inform both clinical care and also, crucially, evidence synthesis, such as systematic reviews and meta-analyses. The second extension item is item 2B. CONSORT 2010 said that specific objectives or hypotheses should be stated in the introduction. The PRO extension from 2013 stated that the PRO hypothesis should be stated in relevant domains identified if applicable. This is important because when we've reviewed the literature, many papers simply don't describe why the PROs are being assessed. We know that a number of publications will state that they're collecting data from using particular questionnaires at certain time points, but actually we see very limited information about why the data are being collected, what hypotheses or objectives are in place associated with this, and what we're aiming to achieve through the PRO collection. Without a pre-specified hypothesis, there is a risk of multiple statistical testing and selective reporting of significant results. This is really important for PROs because actually many PROs can be analysed either with an overall score, with domain scores, and at numerous time points. So there are a number of opportunities for different types of analyses at different time points, and people have the opportunity to selectively report significant results if they wish. So crucially, having this hypothesis stated is really crucial. The third item is the PRO extension method items relating to 6A of the CONSORT 2010 statement. CONSORT 2010 states that the completely defined pre-specified primary and secondary outcome measures should be stated, including how and where when they were assessed. The PRO extension from 2013 states that evidence of PRO instrument validity and reliability should be provided or cited if available. Again, this is really crucial as many PROs can be used in clinical trials. We know that there are literally hundreds of different measures that are now available. The challenge with this is that some of the measures have been developed in a rigorous way with patient input, with appropriate testing and validation methods being used, but some may not have been. And so clinical use of the PRO data requires that trial results are robust, which depends on a valid and reliable PRO measure being used appropriately in the trial. So reporting this will help people to ascertain whether this has been done appropriately. The next item is a methods item 12A. The CONSORT 2010 statement stated that statistical methods used to compare groups with the primary and secondary outcomes should be stated. The PRO extension in 2013 for this particular item stated that statistical approaches for dealing with missing data should be explicitly stated. The reason for this is that, unfortunately, we know that often there can be high levels of missing data from PROs. There are certainly ways to address this, and there are a number of publications with recommended approaches to try and minimize missing data. But we do know that the missing data levels can be quite high for PROs. The challenge with this is that the reason for the missing data might be associated with the outcome of interest. For example, a patient may have deteriorated during a study and the clinical team might not have distributed the PRO as a result. The level of missing PRO data is often high and therefore can lead to reduced power. And it's also a potential source of bias, particularly if you have differential missing data levels across treatment arms. And it can result in misleading results. We therefore recommend that you report this fully in your trial. The final PRO extensions relate to the discussion items 20 and 21. In CONSORT 2010, item 20 states that the trial limitations addressing sources of potential bias, imprecision, and if relevant, multiplicity of analysis should be stated. And item 21 states that generalizability of the trial findings should be discussed. The PRO extension states that PRO-specific limitations and implications for generalizability of study findings and clinical practice should be described. You might think, well, are there any PRO-specific limitations? What might these be? Well, it could be that perhaps you've only used the PRO in a subgroup of your trial population. This may be the case if you have had to distribute the PRO to certain members of the population due to language requirements or for other reasons. And what we need to know as readers is whether there are any reasons to believe that the PRO data might not be generalizable, or whether there are any potential sources of bias, such as missing data, which I mentioned previously, that might influence our reading of the PRO results and how we might use these to inform patient care.
On the next few slides, we're going to look at the PRO elaborations. These are a little less crucial than the PRO extensions, and I'll cover them briefly. Again, on the left-hand side, these elaborations apply to different sections of the publication as written up, and these are meant to guide the reporting of the clinical trial in the same way as are the extensions. In the introduction section, the relevant background and rationale for why PROs were accessed should be briefly described in order to provide the appropriate context for the PRO-specific objectives and hypotheses that are reported in the study. In the methods section, details of the mode and methods of the PRO completion, for example, the use of proxy instrument completions, should be provided, and this is particularly important when PRO is a primary study outcome. In the results section, 3 elaborations are identified. First, the number of participants reporting PRO data at baseline and at subsequent time points should be made quite transparent, thus allowing the reader to assess the potential for bias caused by missing data that Dr. Calvert referred to earlier. In addition, the baseline PRO data should be provided in the so-called Table 1 of participant characteristics in order to assess the relevance and generalizability of the findings as they relate to the patients that were included in the trial. For multidimensional PRO measures, results from each domain and time point specified for analysis should be provided in order to prevent selective reporting of findings, as was referred to earlier. As such, the PRO outcomes should be presented alongside other outcome data to allow clinical integration of the PRO findings with the other pre-specified trial outcomes. And finally, but very importantly, the discussion should provide an interpretation of the PRO findings in order to assist clinicians and patients to interpret the relationships between the PRO data findings and the other trial outcome measures, making uptake of the PRO findings as easy as possible for readers of the trial results.
So there are a number of implications of using the CONSORT-PRO guidance. Improved PRO reporting in clinical trials will enable robust evidence to inform patient choice, aid clinical decision-making, regulatory decision-making, and also to inform health policy. There is increasing evidence that active implementation by journals, authors, and reviewers may lead to improved reporting. And we would really encourage authors to endorse CONSORT-PRO and other reporting guidelines, which are freely available on the Equator Network website. Crucially, we would encourage trial teams to consider right from the start of their trial design, involving co-production with patients, about how their PRO data can be used in practice. Early engagement with regulators and policymakers is also useful at this stage to really maximise the use of the data at a later stage. PRO reporting is intrinsically linked to study design, and we would encourage you to consider design issues, and in particular to look at FDA guidance on PROs available freely at the FDA website, and also the SPIRIT-PRO guidance, which is again freely available. And in addition, the SPIRIT guidance, PRO guidance, which we have outlined on one of the other companion Proteus presentations. As a recap, the final CONSORT-PRO guidance identifies 5 items to be reported in all RCTs in which PROs are a primary or important secondary outcome. An extension was deemed unnecessary for a number of existing CONSORT checklist items. However, an elaboration of items that apply to PROs are recommended. It is recommended that the CONSORT-PRO guidance supplements the standard CONSORT guidelines for reporting RCTs with PROs as primary or secondary outcomes. Further reading is provided with the references below, and we'd encourage you to also look at the other companion presentations in the Proteus series. Thank you very much.